Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the CURT Trailer Hitch receiver on a 2024 Honda Odyssey. This is what your hitch is going to look like when it's installed on the Odyssey, and there's plenty of options that we have for hitches for Odysseys, and I will say this is probably the one that I would pick, mostly because it is a completely hidden cross tube, so all that you see visible once installed is going to be the 2" by 2" receiver tube opening, whereas some of the other hitches are exposed cross tubes, meaning you're going to see the whole of the hitch hanging down. It does make for an easier installation overall, but I think it takes away from the look of the van, whereas this one is nice and clean looking. And being that it's a 2" by 2" receiver tube opening means that you're gonna have tons of options when it comes to any accessory, whether it be a ball mount, bike rack, or cargo carrier. They're all gonna stay in place with a 5/8 pin and clip. Now this is not included with the hitch. A lot of times your accessories will come with one, so that's something to keep in mind when choosing those accessories. And if you plan on leaving it on the back of your van long term, you might want to look at a locking pin and clip so you can lock it in place and know that no one's going to walk away with those accessories. On the bottom of our receiver tube opening, we have a rolled style safety chain loop, and that's going to be great if you plan on pulling a trailer. It's nice and open, so your standard S hooks are going to go on there no problem. Even larger clevis style will be able to hook on with ease. Now, whatever you're putting on the hitch, you do want to check to make sure that you're not overloading the capacities. So as far as pulling a trailer, this one's fairly decent. It comes in at 3,500 pounds, which is going to be the weight of the trailer plus the accessories loaded onto it. And the tongue weight rating is actually pretty solid, and that's really what our neighbor today is going to be using it for. They're going to put a cargo carrier on here for vacation. The tongue weight rating comes in at 525 pounds, which is really good. That means you can get that cargo carrier loaded up on vacation, or even a 4-bike rack loaded, and I don't really worry too much that you're going to go over that capacity. When it comes to towing trailers, you do want to check the vehicle's owner's manual to see what it's capable of towing, and then compare that with the hitch, as well as the other accessories you'll use, such as your ball mount and ball. Take the lowest rating of any of those, and that's what you're going to want to stick with. That way you're not overloading and towing unsafely. Some cargo carrier and bike racks will have a vertical storage, which is really nice. It shortens the length of the vehicle, but you do want to make sure that it's actually going to clear and be able to utilize that function. So measuring from the center of our hitch pin hole to the furthest point of our fascia, we're coming in right at about 4¼ inches. So you should be okay, but that's something to look at on that shank length to make sure that it's going to work. Now keep in mind, as they are in that vertical position, more than likely you're not going to be able to open up the hatch unless you fold them down. Just something to keep in mind. Now, something else that's going to be important when choosing a ball mount especially is going to be our ground clearance. So from the top of the receiver tube opening to the ground, it's coming in at 14 inches. If you have your trailer handy that you plan on towing, you can measure from the ground to the coupler and then determine that height, compare that with what we just measured, and then you can determine that rise or drop necessary. We get a lot of questions about adding a hitch to vehicles and whether or not the hands-free liftgate will work on the vehicle once the hitch is installed. Here's our fob, and I am here to tell you it does indeed work. This is not my vehicle, so I might not be as smooth, but as you can tell, it does still open. Now, I mentioned earlier that this definitely looks cleaner than the other hitches available. There are a few other ones that are going to be hidden cross tubes. That does mean it does require a little bit more installation than the others that just simply bolt up. This one, the fascia is going to have to come off. You do have to lower the exhaust down, which you have to do on all of the hitches to gain access to the weld nuts. But really, it's not too bad. Honda does a really good job of making the fascia come off fairly easily, and step by step, it really doesn't take too long to do. You might want an extra set of hands to be able to do some of this as far as pulling the fascia off and unplugging sensors, as well as raising the hitch up. But other than that, you can definitely do this in your driveway or garage. If you watch this video and maybe it's beyond your scope, maybe you don't have the place to do it, the tools to do it, or even the want to do it, you can use our dealer locator to find someone close to you so you can still get your hitch installed and enjoy all of those benefits. But for you DIYers at home that are going to be tackling this yourself, follow along. I'll walk you through all the steps and make sure you get your hitch installed. To begin our installation, we're going to start underneath the fascia, and there's going to be an appearance panel that just kind of covers up the gap that's located on the driver's side, and eventually we're going to trim this to make sure that we can put that back up. We're going to remove this alongside with the mud flaps, so if you have those, it's better to get those mud flaps off first because those interlock into that underbody panel. And to accomplish this, it's just going to be a couple plastic push pins as well as a small Phillips head to get the screws out. Mud flaps are going to be 3 Phillips screws along with a plastic push pin on each side. Now it is pretty tight here in between the tire and the mud flap, so using a small ratchet with a 1/4 inch drive bit is going to be the ticket for us right now. So we'll get these all taken down. And something that I'll point out, you're going to have a decent amount of hardware coming off while we get the hitch installed, so having a nice organized spot to keep all this is going to make reinstallation that much easier. So we have the one right here that's easily visible, the one below that, and then there's going to be one that's tucked in a little bit further. So once we get this out, I'll show you that. So here, and then also further in, you'll see this one located here. And for the plastic push pin, it's on the bottom side of the fascia. You can use a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool like this, and you're just going to wedge in the center and get that center portion to pop out. And then from there, you should be able to get the whole thing removed, and then we can set our mud flap aside. The appearance panel comes off nice and easy. Just going to be a few plastic push pins along the bottom edge. It should be 4 of them total. And then as you go up towards the wheel, you're going to find that there's going to be a 10mm bolt that's also holding that in. So go ahead, get those removed, and set aside the panel. And with that hardware removed, we should be able to just kind of slide this out of the way. On the underside of the fascia, there's going to be more plastic push pins that we're going to remove. And depending on if you have the hands-free lift gate or just a standard trim, it will differentiate on how many plastic push pins you have. If you have a hands-free liftgate like our van today, there should be a total of 6. But also while we're here, there's a small exhaust deflector. We're going to remove this as well. That's going to give us access to where we're going to bolt up our hitch. So in total, we'll have 8 plastic push pins. First 2 are going to be this deflector. Back at each of our wheel wells, we're going to have 2 Phillips head screws that we're going to remove. Take these off. We'll now need to remove the 2 bolts on each side, so open up your hatch. And these are going to be a 5mm hex, so I have an Allen key here, and we'll just get these taken out. And at this point, we're about ready to get this fascia taken off. So I would recommend having a nice safe spot to keep your fascia so it doesn't get scratched while we're getting the hitch in place. And also you might want to grab an extra set of hands. A lot of times there's going to be electrical connections as we pull off the fascia, and that way one person can support it while the other one unhooks those. Something that you may want to do before removing your fascia is put some painter's tape along the edge of the fascia as well as the rear quarter panel. That way as we pull this off, we don't have any paint rubbing against each other, and it's going to prevent damage from happening once we get our hitch installed and also reinstall the fascia. To get this off, fairly easy. You're just going to want to reach back behind the fascia on the plastic, and there's going to be just a series of clips here. So just take your time, and as you kind of pull back, they're going to unsnap. So just put pressure along here as you go. And some of these tabs, if you kind of lift up and pull, it makes it a little bit easier. And the center section sometimes will be snapped in pretty good. So if you need to, you can grab underneath, and we'll get this popped off. And we're going to look for those electrical connections. So on each side, you can see that there's going to be these plugs. We'll just push down on the tab that's located on here. And this is where it helps to have that extra set of hands to support the fascia as we remove these. And sometimes these can be a little bit tricky, so just take your time here. And if you really need to, you can put a small flathead screwdriver to pull up that locking tab, and that'll make it a lot easier. On the driver's side, it's a little different. There's a small tab located kind of tucked in here. So again, a small flathead, if you don't have long fingernails, can help kind of get in there, and that's what I'm going to do. Just push on this tab, and that should unlatch it, allowing us to pull the plug back. There we go. Now we can grab our fascia, and we'll set this aside. When we get the hitch raised up into position, we'll be using the factory weld nuts to bolt it in place, and you'll see that obviously the exhaust pipe is pretty tight here. So to get our hardware in as well as tighten and torque it down, we're gonna wanna drop this. So what we're gonna do is, if you're doing this in your driveway or garage, we wanna support the exhaust before we lower down the isolators, and that way it's not just free hanging, causing any damage downstream. So I'm just gonna use a cam buckle strap here just to create a cradle. If you're in your driveway or garage doing this, you can simply just put the box from your hitch underneath it, or a block of wood, just anything so it has something to rest against and not just be suspended by itself. There's gonna be 2 isolators that we're gonna tackle. First one is gonna be located here. And I just sprayed this down with the soapy water to help this. And having the other isolator loose means that we're able to kind of move the exhaust pipe, and that's kind of what I recommend doing is, push that to the side so we have a little bit of room to do this. And then I'm going to use part of our subframe here as leverage to pry this off. And then once you get that removed, just be careful. This can drops down, so make sure that your head is obviously not underneath the exhaust as you're lowering it. Now, something that you might want to do, a lot of this is going to be protected, but we're going to be running our hardware into the weld nuts that correspond to the holes on the hitch. So you might want to take your hardware and just make sure it passes in fairly easily. Grab your extra set of hands. I got Shane helping me here. We each have a bolt with a conical tooth washer, and the teeth are going to bite into the metal on the hitch. So just have one on each side ready. That way we can start the hitch and it'll hold itself up while we get the other hardware in place. So just holding it here, slide that up over the exhaust, thread this on, and once you get those started, you can let go of the hitch and we'll just get the other hardware put in place. With all the hardware hand tightened in place, now's a good time. You can tell that the holes are slotted as you put it in, and that's to allow for a little bit of wiggle room, but we also want to make sure that the hitch is centered up. So just kind of using the bottom portion that's welded on here. This center one's a good reference, so make sure you get a straight shot on there. And at this point, we can go ahead and tighten them down. We're going to come back with a torque wrench, so you don't need to get crazy here, but we'll be using a 19mm socket to snug this all up. Dial in your torque wrench to the torque settings found in the instruction manual, and if you don't have a torque wrench at home, you can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. But this is going to be important with weld nuts because you want to make sure obviously it's tight enough for the hitch to be able to tow for the lifespan of the vehicle, but also not too tight, putting stress on any of the hardware or the weld nuts. So we'll go through and we'll get these all torqued down. We do need to do some trimming before we put the fascia and the appearance panel back. And the best way to do this to find a center point is if you measure from the outside edges of the 2 mounting holes where we had plastic push pins, it's 16 inches. So I marked 8 inches here and then just went 2 3/4 out because this total span needs to be 5 1/2, and then just went down 3 1/2. Painter's tape gives you a nice clean line to follow. Our appearance panel is just going to be underneath here. You'll see this small little edge. It's pretty easy to follow along and just cut along this edge. And as far as cutting, you can use a Dremel. You can use a pair of snips. Just take your time. I like to use a multi-tool or oscillating tool. It gives you a nice clean cut. So we'll go ahead, we'll get this chopped out. Now once cut out, you might want to go back with a file or even just a flat blade of a knife and just get all these burrs taken down to give it a nice clean look. And then with our appearance panel, I'll just run this down and get this cut out. So with those 2 items trimmed out, we're ready to just put everything back in the reverse order that we took them off. Make sure you get your exhaust put back on, and when you get that fascia put back on, also make sure that you're plugging in both electrical connectors. And that was a look and installation of the CURT Trailer Hitch receiver on a 2024 Honda Odyssey.